Okay, welcome everyone to this deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're focusing on a pretty specific spot on the Thai-Cambodia border. It's called Chungbuk. Sometimes people call it the Emerald Triangle.
That's right. And it's been in the news lately because of some renewed tensions,
Yeah.
but there's a lot more going on there, a lot of history.
Yeah, layers and layers of it. So we've gathered quite a bit of material, recent news reports, some historical analysis looking at the economics, the culture.
Basically trying to get the full picture from what's available.
And our mission really is to help you unpack all of that. We'll look at the recent clash, the diplomatic responses, why this area is historically so sensitive.
The economic connections, which might surprise you, the cultural stuff that bubbles up, and then maybe what the sources suggest about finding a way forward peacefully.
And just to be clear, we're sticking strictly to the information in the sources we reviewed for this.
Absolutely. So think of this as, your guide to understanding why this little tri-border point and the whole Thai-Cambodia relationship matters. It's a real mix of history, politics, money, even social media these days.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate trigger. What actually happened just a few days ago? Because things seem to escalate pretty quickly at Chongbuk.
Right. The material points to something specific on the morning of May 28th this year, 2025, right in that disputed zone.
What happened?
Well, it looks like it was an encounter between Thai and Cambodian soldiers, and reports say there was gunfire. Lasted about 10 minutes, starting quite early, around 5:30 a.m.
Gunfire. Okay. And straight away, we started seeing different stories about what happened. Right?
Exactly. That's key. Cambodia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs fired off an official protest note really quickly, May 29th.
And what was their claim?
Their version, based on the material, is that Thai soldiers shot first, unlawfully, and tragically, one Cambodian soldier was killed. They called it a violation of their sovereignty, demanded an investigation. And crucially, they argued their troops had been positioned right there, peacefully, long before the 2000 MOU, that's the Memorandum of Understanding, was even signed.
Right, the 2000 MOU. But the Thai army had a different take.
Significantly different, yeah. The spokesperson's comments, as reported, really emphasize that the immediate issue isn't final ownership. It's about how both sides manage being in this overlapping area.
Managing coexistence.
Right. And they brought up evidence, apparently aerial photos, suggesting the Cambodian troops hadn't been there for decades, but had actually dug new trenches recently, right at that spot where the clash happened.
Ah, okay. So Cambodia says, we've been here ages. Thailand says, looks like recent activity in a disputed zone.
That's the core of the disagreement on the ground, it seems. It really highlights the different perspectives on what the status quo actually is right now.
So shooting stops. What happened next to calm things down?
Thankfully, it seems the military commanders on both sides could talk to each other pretty quickly. That contact helped stop the shooting. And then they actually met face-to-face on May 29th, the day after. They reached an agreement on sort of the immediate next step.
Okay, what was in that agreement?
Well, the reports say they agreed on a practical step. Pull back troops 200 meters from where the clash happened, create a bit of space.
A buffer zone. Makes sense.
And they also, restated their commitment to using the official channels, the proper mechanisms, to sort out border stuff, like the JBC, the Joint Boundary Commission.
Okay, pull back troops, use the JBC. It sounds like de-escalation, but then the story gets a bit weird with how this was reported, right?
Yeah, this is where you really see the underlying tensions surface in the messaging. The Thai side put out a statement summarizing the agreement in 3 points.
Which were?
Basically, use the peaceful mechanisms like the JBC, GBC, MOU, maintain the current situation, show restraint, use the JBC process, and respect sovereignty, prevent more clashes. Pretty standard stuff.
Okay. In Cambodia.
Well, they released what they called a 4-point statement. It had those same 3 points, but they added a fourth.
Which was?
The 4th point stated they would not withdraw from that specific clash point.
Wait, even though the agreement was reportedly to withdraw 200 meters?
Exactly. Their justification went back to their earlier claim that they were there before the 2000 MOU, so withdrawing would be like leaving their own land. And they even claimed Thailand had agreed to all 4 points.
Wow. So that directly contradicts the Thai statement.
It does. So the disagreement wasn't just about the history or who shot first. It was immediately about what they just agreed on, like hours before.
That discrepancy tells you a lot, doesn't it? About how deep these differing interpretations run.
Absolutely. Even when commanders find a practical solution on the ground, the national narratives and Conflicting views on past agreements just pop right back up in the public statements.
Now, while all this was happening at Chungbuk with the gunfire and the conflicting statements, did the sources say anything about other border crossings?
Yeah, that was an interesting contrast. One report mentioned the Cheongsataku crossing. That's between Buriram in Thailand and Odar Minchi in Cambodia. Apparently, it just stayed open. Normal hours, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Business as usual.
Huh. So the tension was quite localized.
Would seem so, at least in terms of immediate impact on daily life elsewhere. There was even a quote from a local merchant there saying trade was slow, but they thought it was just, the weather, not the conflict news.
Right. A little bit of perspective there. Okay, let's zoom out. This place, Chongbuk, the Emerald Triangle. What actually is it geographically, and why is it so historically charged?
Okay, so geographically, it's where three countries meet: Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. It's up in the Dangrik Mountains. The area in dispute is about 12 square kilometers.
And it's officially called an overlapping claims area.
Precisely because the border demarcation work there isn't finished yet. The line isn't fully agreed upon or marked on the ground.
And its history, not exactly peaceful.
Oh, definitely not. The material really underscores the intense fighting there back in the 80s, specifically 1985 to 1987.
Who was fighting?
It was the Thai army against Vietnamese troops who were operating inside Cambodia at the time.
That sounds like a major confrontation.
It really was. The reports mention significant Thai casualties, 109 killed, over 600 injured in that period. So Chongbuk became this very potent symbol in Thailand linked to defending sovereignty.
And even after the Vietnamese left and the Cold War wound down, the border issue itself didn't go away.
No, the fundamental problem of the overlapping claims, the unfinished demarcation, just persisted.
So controlling specific points there, like hills. There was mention of a Hill 496. That's strategically important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
These high points give you observation, control over passes. It explains why things like, the recently reported trench digging are seen as significant. It's about physical presence and advantage in this contested space.
Which brings us back to that 2000 MOU again.
Exactly. The MOU set up the JBC process for jointly surveying and marking the border. But the sticking point, highlighted by incidents like this, is the clause about not changing the physical status quo in disputed areas while that work is ongoing.
But they don't agree on what the status quo is or even which map to use.
That's a huge part of it. The analysis points out that they rely on different historical map versions. That's one reason you have these overlapping areas to begin with.
So Cambodia argues status quo ante, meaning the situation before the MOU, saying if they were there then, that's the baseline.
Right. While Thailand's interpretation of the MOU is more like, in these disputed zones, nobody should be building new things or changing the facts on the ground until the JBC finishes its work. It's a fundamental clash over interpreting both history and the agreement.
Okay, it's clear this runs much deeper than just military positioning. The sources also get into the social and cultural dimensions, right? Even online stuff.
They do. And it's fascinating. There's analysis talking about the friction you sometimes see online between Thais and Cambodians, described it as bumping heads.
Yeah, you see that sometimes.
The view presented is that, with more interaction online, some level of friction is maybe understandable. It doesn't necessarily mean there's this deep, intractable conflict between the populations themselves.
But history definitely fuels some of it. Those online arguments often bring up historical claims.
Oh, for sure. History plays a massive role. The sources touch on how sometimes Thai historical narratives might portray Cambodia in a less than flattering light. The Phraya Lawek story gets mentioned.
Although academics doubt parts of that story, right? The blood-washing bit.
Exactly. The material notes that historians generally see that part as legend. And then from the Cambodian perspective, their view of Thailand is partly influenced, the analysis suggests, by French colonial narratives.
Mm-hmm.
France kind of positioned itself as the protector against an expansionist Thailand.
So these old narratives still echo today.
They contribute to the sensitivities, yeah. And you see it connected to this whole claiming culture thing that flares up online.
Like arguments over who invented what or which country owns certain traditions. Kun Khmer, for example.
Precisely. The material frames this as cultural nationalism, the idea that your culture defines your nation, so the nation owns the culture, which gets really tricky when you have shared heritage across borders that are, historically speaking, quite recent.
And things like UNESCO World Heritage status add fuel to that fire.
Definitely another layer, yeah. Competing for that international recognition.
And there's a risk that politicians can exploit this nationalism.
A big risk. The analysis points this out clearly. Nationalism is powerful politically. It mentions how Cambodia's former leader, Hun Sen, sometimes used border issues and nationalist feelings to, rally support at home.
And his recent comments about the Emerald Triangle threatening to go to the
This
ICJ.
is very much in that context. It raises the possibility of information operations, or I.O.
Using information or maybe disinformation to influence things.
Exactly. Manipulating public opinion domestically, maybe trying to shape how the situation looks internationally. The risk for Thailand, the sources suggest, is being painted as aggressive or, alternatively, facing political attacks at home if the government looks like it's being soft on sovereignty.
It's a complex web, historical baggage, national pride, political maneuvering, but then there's the economy.
Right, and this is such a crucial counter-narrative. The material really stresses the close economic links. Thailand exports a lot to Cambodia, and maybe even more importantly, relies heavily on Cambodian workers, hundreds of thousands of them.
So despite the tensions, they are actually quite interdependent.
Hugely. That economic reality creates a powerful incentive for both sides to keep things stable and find ways to coexist, regardless of the border disputes.
Okay, so given that backdrop, the recent clash, the history, the politics, the economics, what did the sources say about ways forward? Opportunities for peace.
Well, one significant positive step highlighted was upgrading the relationship to a strategic partnership. That happened in February 2024, when the current Cambodian Prime Minister, Hun Manet, visited Thailand.
Strategic partnership. Sounds important.
It signals a high level of intended cooperation. And the material lists very specific things they agreed on during that visit.
Like what?
Things like aiming for a big increase in trade, $15 billion by 2025, speeding up demining work along the border, which is a huge practical issue, promoting more cross-border trade and investment, tourism.
So practical, tangible stuff.
Yes. And also cooperation on tackling crime, like those online scam operations that plague the region. They even talked about jointly benefiting from resources in the maritime overlapping claims area while also working on the sea boundary demarcation.
And making travel easier.
Definitely a focus. Things like using temporary border passes, letting tourists stay longer, travel further inland like the Siem Reap. Even talk of a 6 countries, 1 destination tourism concept for the whole region.
What about shared environmental issues like the haze?
Address that too. They agreed to set up a joint working group specifically on cross-border haze, maybe even a hotline for sharing information.
And the Cambodian workers in Thailand.
That was discussed, with Thailand reaffirming commitments to ensure fair treatment and good conditions for them.
And they actually signed agreements.
Yeah, 5 specific MOUs covering disaster relief, science and tech, moving goods across borders, and boosting business links through their banks and chambers of commerce. It's a pretty comprehensive cooperation framework on paper.
And crucially, they reaffirmed the JBC as the way to handle border issues.
Yes, the sources confirm the JBC was explicitly named as the mechanism. And it's maybe worth noting, 2025 marks 75 years of diplomatic ties, a symbolic milestone.
Now, one source brought in a really interesting historical figure, Priti's Banomyang, a former Thai PM. How does his perspective relate to all this?
It's used to offer a kind of framework for thinking about peaceful resolution. The analysis links Priti's long-held ideas about peace, independence, sovereignty, and regional cooperation to today's challenges.
What was his core message?
A strong emphasis on diplomacy and law, using mechanisms like the JBC, or even arbitration if needed instead of military force, respecting the rule of law.
And his idea of independence wasn't just about borders.
No, his view, as presented, was that true independence also means not letting your country become a tool for outside powers, which is relevant, given the colonial roots of some of these borderlines. He advocated for regional solutions to regional problems, self-reliance.
Like his old idea for a Southeast Asia League.
Exactly. Solving things among neighbors. And related to that, the analysis drawing on Priti suggests actively working against ethnic bias and stereotypes.
Oh.
Through mutual respect, cultural exchange, dialogue between people, not just governments, what's often called track 2 diplomacy, basically building understanding to counter those who might stir up conflict, the warmongers, as the source puts it.
And how does a country balance that with global politics, dealing with the U.S., China?
The interpretation offered is a kind of smart or engaged neutrality. Maintain ties with everyone, but don't get drawn into their conflicts. Prioritize regional stability.
So Priti's legacy is presented as a call for Thailand to be proactive on peace.
Yeah, an ASEAN leader in peace, not just reacting to crises, but actively seeking peaceful solutions.
So the takeaway is, Yes, defend sovereignty, but do it peacefully, maintain friendships.
Exactly. Use facts, use law, use negotiation.
Hmm.
Avoid extreme nationalism. The source even floats ideas like, really pushing to finish the demarcation quickly, or maybe creating joint development zones to kind of park the dispute for now.
But all of this, the diplomacy, managing the history, pushing cooperation, it needs strong leadership, doesn't it?
That comes through very clearly. You can have the mechanisms, the agreements, but making it work, navigating all the pressures, that takes political will and courage on both sides in Bangkok and Phnom Penh.
So to wrap up this Chongbok situation, it's
Yeah.
really a microcosm of so many things: history, geography, national claims, politics, economics, culture, all tangled together.
It really shows how these old border issues can suddenly flare up, interacting with modern politics and national feelings.
But importantly, the material also shows there are paths forward. Formal mechanisms like the JBC exist. There's this recent strategic partnership commitment with concrete cooperation plans.
Right. The tools for peaceful management are there, even if interpretations differ sometimes.
So, managing this peacefully, actually using those agreed mechanisms, building trust, it seems absolutely vital, not just for the border areas, but for the whole region.
It really is a test of diplomacy, of commitment to those principles.
And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it, about that balance? How do you uphold national pride, acknowledge history, but also embrace the practical need for peaceful coexistence and economic cooperation, especially now when countries are so connected?
It brings to mind the quote attributed to Priti Banamyung in the source material. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. Chonbok really puts that principle to the test for Thailand and Cambodia right now.